Welcome to the Everstream Analytics Record Level Shipping Costs Intensify Supply Chain Stakes webinar. We'll get started shortly at the top of the hour. All attendees will be muted on this call. If you have any questions, please use the chat or question toolbar. This presentation will be recorded and made available to you after the webinar. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, hello, and welcome to the Record Level Shipping Costs. Everstream is a leading and predictive supply chain risk analytics solution that provides actionable insights to enable greater resilience and agility. We help companies think bigger and see further and act sooner so they can get in front of what's ahead. Hello, my name is Dana Sadiq, Senior Marketing Manager, and I will be your webinar host and Q&A moderator for today. This presentation will be recorded and made available to you tomorrow. Let me share with you what's going on and why we're talking about record level shipping costs. Our intelligence solutions team has been monitoring risk events and trends around the world, the latest being these shipping costs. Today, we'll discuss these trends and how it's impacting industries today and what the outlook would be. In addition, we will show you solutions to help you mitigate the risk. Allow me to set the stage. Transportation costs to ship containers from Asia to North America and Europe have been rising at a historic pace as shippers drive up rates and search for ocean transportation capacity that is expected to remain tight until at least the Lunar New Year 2022 or even the summer of 2022. Spot rates started to gradually increase in the summer of 2020 as consumer demand began rising following the easing of COVID-19 related lockdowns. A series of short-term maritime disruptions in 2021 has further exacerbated a global container equipment imbalance and unreliable vessel schedules that have been identified as major contributing factors to spot rates rising to even higher levels than those at the end of 2020. Our experts predict the crisis will likely hit cargo shippers ranging in a variety of industries as they work to meet high customer demand for their goods or replenish inventory levels ahead of the year-end holidays. So let's get the 411 from our Everstream experts. Let's welcome Mirko Wojcik and Felipe Dustalant. Mirko is Senior Manager of Intelligence Solutions located in Germany, and Felipe Dustalant is Senior Manager of Product Management, and he's coming to us from Florida. Thanks, guys. Let's go ahead and give you the reins, Mirko. Tell us what's going on.
Thank you, Dana, for setting the stage. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. From my side, my name is Mirko Wojcik. I'm excited to be discussing the current challenges in the ocean freight industry in this webinar together with my colleague Felipe, and really share some insights as to what we see in terms of the underlying reasons and what that really means for ocean-dependent supply chains, but especially focus on how long the situation is likely to continue and what's companies can do at this point to really mitigate some of the biggest impacts on their operations, given the very, very challenging situation. So we wanted to start out this webinar by looking at what's currently happening in the Western Pacific. So we're tracking a tropical storm, a strong tropical storm that will, as it stands now, pass just south of Japan today or early tomorrow, and has already been causing some minor disruption. Ports from Nagoya to Kobe and Osaka likely to halt operations for some time today and tomorrow. And that event is maybe not extraordinary in itself in normal times, but given the current turmoil in ocean logistics, every event really, whether it's a minor storm like this one that's not even making landfall, or a big hurricane as the one that has made landfall in the US a few weeks ago, devastating parts of the US Gulf coasts, whether it's a cyber attack really on ports, such as we've seen in South Africa a few months ago, or whether it's outbreaks because of COVID-19 at Chinese ports. We've seen that in Ningbo this year, Yantian, or whether it's a blockage of the Suez Canal for 1 week. All of these events, minor or big, are really responsible for the current situation and further upending ocean logistics and supply chains, and keep them really from normalizing anytime soon. The result of this is probably something that all of you have seen: endless delays, record high shipping costs, rolled cargo, but especially little to no capacity on certain trade routes. So how do we get here? And we wanted to focus a little bit on the underlying reasons, and it really all started in 2020, obviously in the first quarter. Next slide, please, Dana. So when the ocean freight market has been somewhat in turmoil ever since the first quarter of 2020, when COVID broke out in Asia. Container lines really drastically reduced capacity because of the slump in demand, but then demand came back quicker in Asia than was expected, and then also elsewhere, especially Europe and North America after the end of the initial lockdowns in 2020, in the summer of 2020. So carriers then took a strategic decision to not immediately inject huge capacity into the market, but really keep capacity rather tight. And they have done so, and they have done differently since the beginning of the year, because they have injected now much more capacity in the market than was the case 12 or 18 months ago. So the strong demand there has really meant that every ship now that can move, and really there are even multi-purpose ships that have been used recently as container ships only. Everything that can move is really out there, and so capacity is much greater at this point. But it's really the demand that is contributing to a lot of the capacity shortages and challenges that we see. At the same time, there's a lot of ongoing disruptions in 2021, especially. So it's not all COVID related anymore, but there has been the Suez Canal closure in March, when supply chains were somewhat stabilizing, prices were coming down from record highs in March, April. But you still have ongoing, short-term events that can lead to a lot of disruption, like the COVID-19 outbreaks in Ningbo and Yantian this year, but then also the occasional hurricane or typhoon here and there. And all of those basically short-term disruptions have resulted in persistent congestion at major gateways that at this point is really tying up a lot of container capacity for weeks at a time. Right now, as it stands, about 10% of global container capacity is somewhere stacked up on ships outside of congested ports. If you're following the media, obviously everyone's talking about Los Angeles, Long Beach. There's about 500,000 TEO currently stacked outside the port on, I think the latest count was 66 ships waiting to anchor. So that has also been another major roadblock to restoring any kind of normalcy, especially when you think about the global container equipment imbalance between East and West that has started to really sort of impose itself in the latter half of 2020, when containers that were only slowly getting worked off at destination ports in Europe and North America, they could not be returned fast enough actually to kind of restore that imbalance, and really started to clog up ports. Los Angeles is a key example, but we're also going to talk about other ports that are really struggling with a lot of imports, a lot of sort of untransferred cargo, and a lot of very high yard density throughout the webinar. And then in the early stages of this year, as the rates started to really go sky high, we shifted container capacity that was available on secondary trade routes and shifted it to more lucrative routes, such as the Trans-Pacific one or the Asia-Europe one, where we've seen the biggest sort of price increases and cost increases, and that has in turn caused on ripple effects on the secondary trade lanes that have seen even higher prices as well compared to the past, but also a lot of container shortages because these lanes have not been prioritized. So the consequences of these factors actually now have really been felt across all supply chains, as was said at the beginning, in the last 9 to 12 months. So we wanted to dive a little bit deeper and really look at what some of the impacts have been, and how it's kind of try to visualize that as much as possible. So if we can go to the next slide here, we wanted to first start out by looking at really the schedule reliability. I mean, as of last month, global schedule reliability in ocean logistics has reached a record low of only 33% of services arriving on time. If you look to compare that with the numbers of 2018, 2019, so the last normal years before COVID, that number is typically around 70 to 80%. But that had already started to drop significantly from August 2020, as you can see here, the green line, when demand started to pick up in North America and Europe, and congestion really started to build and force ships to wait outside of ports for a longer period of time, and then kind of disrupting, creating knock-on effects and disrupting the schedules. What is also important to underline is that 33% is obviously the average, but that number is even lower on certain trade lanes. If you look at the Asia to US West Coast one, where obviously there's the destination port Los Angeles, Long Beach, and that's one of the key lanes in global trade. Reliability is as low as 10%, actually, up to this point in August 2021. So now let's look a little bit at the impacts on the global shipping costs in the last 12 to 18 months. So specifically the spot market, which only accounts for about 40% of the goods shipped, but is in this current situation with capacity so tight, especially especially important. The graph here shows that the average cost to ship a 40-foot container on the 8 major east-west trade routes, that's basically an average, has exceeded $10,000 for the first time in August 2021. And that is still some 300% higher than at the same period of 2020, so 12 months ago. Last week, for the first time, the costs have stopped rising for the first time in 5 months, which kind of coincides with the aftermath of the Suez Canal closure. And ever since that Suez Canal closure, really costs have really only been rising. So if you compare the different trade routes, the biggest cost increases have been recorded on a few trade lanes specifically. We've mentioned the Asia North Europe trade route. Maybe we can go to the next slide here. They've been rising as much as 886% if you compare that to 2019 figures. And the second highest increase has been on the intra-Asia lane, but also on, which is also secondary lane, as well as the Asia Latin America lane, both rising by more than 500%. So obviously there's a lot of talk about the US West Coast lane from Asia, but also US East Coast and the North Europe one. But there are a lot of other lanes that have seen similar, if not higher, price increases if you compare that to 2019 averages. However, the actual spot market rates may actually be far greater, because a lot of the additional costs that include that are really important now, and without which really it's not possible really to obtain space on vessels in an increasingly competitive bidding environment. Costs such as premium surcharges for equipment or space guarantees, as well as customs or brokerage clearance, all that is now not reflected in these sort of benchmark rates. And so in some cases, the total costs could actually surpass $20,000 easily, if you include also costs for inland distribution. So obviously they have to be seen in a wider context, and are not the actual true numbers in the end. One apparent paradox, if we can go to the next slide here, is that if you look at the consequences in terms of congestion, really, is that shipping lines have actually increased nominal shipping capacity in the past 12 months, as we said. So there's more capacity now available than 12 months ago, or even 18 months ago. But that the additional capacity increases have in reality been very negligible because of the congestion and the delays that we see around the world. If you look at the Asia North Europe trade lane, before, carriers used to typically have 10 to 11 active ships for the services there. Now they have 2 to 3 ships more, but that's obviously hardly visible because most of the ships are tied up at ports, waiting at anchor. so that capacity is not really there, and more vessels actually have only worsened in most of the cases the supply chain bottlenecks, because it takes longer obviously to unload two 5,000 TEU vessels than just one 10,000 TEU vessel at a port that is congested already. Because of this, if you compare that with the Trans-Pacific route, Asia to North America, the congestion issues effectively have removed between 20 to 25% of capacity at this point. So to highlight really these truly unprecedented scale of the congestion, it's worth looking at what has happened on the US West Coast really in the last 9 to 12 months. Ships have been arriving at a relentless pace there, bringing goods from Asia. If we look at here the top left, so that's the monthly average port waiting times and days at the Port of Long Beach and Port of Los Angeles. You see that here typically, so when it started in January, actually that started way earlier. So in November, December, the waiting time started to increase, and that has kind of continued into January. So there was a strong demand and a lot of issues at the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach. That started to come down a little bit towards the end of Q1, beginning of Q2. You had a big spike there in Los Angeles, in Long Beach in May, but the downward trend continued towards sort of 5-6 days in average waiting times. But recently, as you see here, August, September has been as high as it has ever been. With the recent news that there's about 70 or 66 container ships waiting outside, and basically the port trying to find any means possible to manage the flow of inbound goods. So it's really as worse as it has been. And if you put that into perspective into the entire US West Coast, it's quite interesting to see that that had an impact basically on all ports in the US, at least on the West Coast. Here we have compared the Port of Los Angeles in gray, on the gray line here, top right, compare that to the Port of Oakland and the Port of Seattle. So you see here, as congestion in Q1 was coming down in the Port of Los Angeles, at the same time ships started to divert to the Port of Oakland, and there basically over time, especially in March, April, that started to really outmatch the congestion that was seen in Los Angeles, and then even going as high as 20 days on average for ships were having to wait outside the port before they would be unloaded. That peaked in June, and at the same time was coming down. But you see the orange line here with the Port of Seattle actually now being really affected by the diversion of ships, but also they've been battling a lot of intermodal congestion with sort of rail lines or rail containers not being picked up on time to get shipped to the Midwest. So really now, as it stands, even though it's really bad at the Port of Los Angeles, actually it's in terms of the waiting times, it's even worse at the Port of Seattle, and it's right now one of the most congested ports in North America. And you can really clearly see here the impact of one of the Los Angeles congestion, and how that kind of then transferred over the year since January to the Port of Oakland, but then even further north to the Port of Seattle. Now on the lower left, if we compare that to the East Coast, there's been a lot of talk about the East Coast as well. Recently here, one of the largest ports, the Port of Savannah, has also recently been plagued with congestion. Waiting times are now averaging about 1 week. That's still not comparable to what we see on the West Coast, but it's continues to rise. As you see here, ever since May, when it was around 2 days, now it's really averaging about 7 days, and there's about 30 ships outside the port, and that is also starting to create and sort of be diverted to other ports. We see more ship diversions to other gateways such as New York, Newark. There's about 10 ships waiting there as of Monday this week, and that's likely driving up delays there as well in the coming weeks. And to put the congestion into a global perspective, comparing again Los Angeles congestion to other ports in the world, the issue, as you can see here, is now so widespread that it's affecting really all kind of all regions around the world, albeit at a different scale. You have, for example, here in green, you have the Port of Antwerp in Europe, which has seen waiting times of also about a week since the summer. That has recently dropped a little bit to 4 days. You have the Port of Ningbo in China, one of the world's largest ports, still battling delays of 2-3 days that have come down from 4.5 days ever since the outbreak happened there in August. You have the port of Yantian in southern China, one of the key export gateways for everything from electronics to automotive electronics. They have seen average delays, obviously with the spike in with the outbreak at the port in May, average delays of 8 to 10 days, and that has recently come down to now 4 days. But operations are still not entirely normalized there. There's still a lot of delays, and all of these ports there that we have chosen to highlight are hyper efficient ports in normal times. But in these challenging times, congestion has even become the new normal there. So yeah, with these kind of numbers here, and to put that into perspective, we obviously wanted to ask ourselves what are our customers doing? What can we expect in the coming month? And is there any chance that really things will calm down still in 2021, or will that kind of be postponed until 2022? So if we go to the next slide here, one positive indicator is that the peak may have been reached, or the peak of the crisis of the congestion. We've seen the World Container Index has stopped rising for the first time in 5 months in the past week. If we look at specific major trade lanes such as the Asia US West Coast route, their spot rates have come down by 5% in the last week. So that's one positive sign that we're interpreting. There's another factor that is also very positive, is that 2021 is again not a normal year, so there will not really be a peak season in the traditional sense, since really the container liner market is already sold out, and carriers, as we said, everything that is running or sort of moving in terms of ships is moving, so there's really not enough capacity to inject additional capacity that would really be needed to launch any kind of real peak season service program. So that is maybe because shippers have advanced a lot of their shipments from the third quarter that was scheduled for the third quarter into the second quarter because of low inventory levels, or because shippers have been anticipating even higher prices in Q3, Q4. But that might also be a factor that that prices and capacity might be sort of balanced out until the end of the year. An additional factor that we're also considering is the upcoming Golden Week holiday in China, where factories are typically shutting down for 1 week, and some of the backlogs at the origin ports, we've talked about it, Ningbo, but also there's Shanghai, Yantian, that could be cleared, and some of the service schedules that have been disrupted could be recovered. We are seeing not a lot of blank sailings that have been announced for next week and the weeks thereafter. So that also indicates that the ocean carriers are really intended to clear the backlog from the congested origin ports, and more capacity on these routes with lower demand really means that, or could mean that the prices would decrease further in the coming months or in the coming weeks. At the same time, the latest outlook of Maersk Line, the biggest container carrier in the world, highlighted that they expect that because inventory levels remain low in many parts of the world, that cargo volumes are really expected to remain very strong in the coming months, and few blank sailings really mean that ships will also continue to arrive at destination ports in North America, in Latin America, in Europe, in the Middle East, and really continue to really inject a lot of inbound volumes at already congested ports. So there's not really going to be a relief here, and it's not going to help to clear the backlog at the destination ports, at least. If we look at the right-hand side here, the latest market outlook for September from DHL, freight forwarder DHL, they expect also rates to further increase despite capacity remaining stable, especially on the lanes out of Asia that we've highlighted here. We've analyzed the 21 lanes, and only about 20%, so 1/5 of all the lanes that DHL is sort of forecasting will remain stable in terms of prices or slightly decline in the coming months. So they're clearly also, even though capacity remains stable, prices will continue to increase. And if we take both Maersk and DHL together, really the assessment here that we see is that any normalization in terms of capacity and rates is unlikely to happen before Chinese New Year 2022. So that will start next year on February 1st. and that could well lead, similar to actually this year, to really allow sort of the equipment imbalances to be restored and a lot of the backlogs to be cleaned out. It has happened to some degree actually in 2020, but then the Suez Canal closure really undid most of those efforts. And so, what we're saying here, or what we're seeing here, is that any external shock, such as the Suez Canal closure, but it could also be something like the Yantian COVID-19 outbreak. If something like this, of this scale, happens again until February 22, that will very likely only delay the normalization period even further. So at this point, given the very challenging market situation, what are the options for companies really to react to this crisis? So what we recommend our customers is first, given the significance of any short-term disruptions, we've seen it in the intro with the current typhoon sort of approaching Japan, but all of these short-term disruptions that we've seen this year, it's really critical that to create a greater awareness inside your organization of what's happening at your key logistics gateways, your key hubs that you rely on for imports and exports, so that in case anything happens, you can react faster and really be one of the first to react and activate any kind of contingency measures internally that have been set up, such as rerouting or expediting critical shipments. From a strategic and planning point of view, it can also be beneficial to really continuously assess the risk exposure of your key ports. So if and then to take decisions based on that, to adjust your supply chain and the flow of the goods where necessary. For instance, we've been talking about the destination ports. We've been talking about Los Angeles, but also Savannah or Antwerp, and a lot of them are by now chronically congested, and that's not going to change anytime soon. So they're obviously knowing that and sort of assessing risks and congestion risk in particular can help sort of maybe to unload cargo elsewhere, go to this different destination port, but to kind of really avoid the major gateways that are now so chronically congested. A third point is actually to not so well known, but despite the current turmoil and obviously there's a lot of negative news out there, some carriers are actually offering better services than others. We've seen among the top 14 global carriers, Maersk, Hapag-Lloyd, and MSC are actually the ones with the greatest reliability levels. Maersk is even approaching the 50% mark in whereas on average, as we've seen, it's as low as 33% now. And if you compare that to the bottom class, that's you look at Evergreen, you look at OOCL, you look at Yangming, they have levels that are below the 20% threshold. So there's really a difference between the carriers as well. So it's not all doom and gloom. On top of that, if you look at specific trade lanes, there's actually now, ever since the turmoil started to happen in August 2020, some of the smaller carriers, or what are called niche carriers, have actually performed better than a lot of the top global carriers, such as Maersk, Hapag-Lloyd, or MSC. Actually, as of last month, the most reliable niche carriers have consistently outperformed the most reliable top 14 carriers, such as Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd, even on the routes that are the most challenging ones, such as the Asia-US West Coast one. So there you have those smaller carriers such as Matson Shipping, SM Line, Westwood Shipping that have actually now also offered more and more services, and they're actually using smaller vessels that can bypass the congested terminals, and also offering most of the time direct, faster port-to-port connections that are not stopping or not calling at a lot of different ports. So that's definitely an option, and something that has really emerged in the crisis since August 2020. And finally, the current situation also highlights that it's really critical to build long-term relationships with a key logistics partner for your supply chain operations. What we're seeing is that a lot of the forwarders are actually willing to go the extra mile for long-term existing customers, while that might not necessarily be the case actually for new customers, even if they're ready to pay extraordinary amounts, but then might shift their volumes according to who might offer a better rate at this time. So it's really about the long-term relationship that COVID-19 has really shown again that this is really a major advantage if you have that. And here again, obviously, these long-term relationships cannot do wonders, but we've seen that forwarders are really willing to go the extra mile for existing customers, especially if there's accurate forecasting in terms of volumes 4 to 6 weeks in advance. There's really a lot of mountains to be moved for those customers, as we've seen. We've seen, for instance, that a lot of the forwarders are now trying to alleviate some of the ocean bottlenecks by still chartering their own vessels. They have started to do so at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, and we see that trend actually continuing. Maybe not as publicly as in the past, but we see that likely to continue in 2022. So they're chartering vessels of several hundred TEUs, very small ones that are still on the market. On the big trade lanes, we've seen that from Asia to Europe, from Asia to North America, but they do that for existing customers only and based on historic volumes. So it's not obviously possible to then all of a sudden ship way more than in the past. And here again, because of those smaller vessels, they're also able to bypass the congested ports and have been using different ports as alternatives that are not as congested, so really offering more reliable services. But again, that's only for existing customers. So here, really, it's what we've seen as one key differentiator and sort of supply chain reliance and supply chain resiliency is really to work with one key forwarder that sort of has a long-term relationship. So with these insights, I want to now hand over to my colleague Felipe, who will take us through how we are currently helping customers navigate the current challenging environment and really look at the solution that we're offering.
Thank you, Mirko. Yeah, so what you can see here in my screen is the representation of a network, right? In our solution, our Everstream solution, we are able to see, let's say, a company's network represented by these hexagons here that represents static locations, could be ports, warehouses, DCs, etc., but also represented in aggregation with these donut shapes, right? If I hover over, I can see the locations that I have in that area. For example, here I have 9 locations in this cluster, right? In addition, we in the Everstream solution, we are scoring network elements such as locations. We're scoring them on risk. That's why you see green locations, amber locations, and red locations. We score them from a scale from 1 to 25, being 1 low risk, 25 high risk, and amber in the middle. So from here, I can also see the incidents, right, or events that are going on around the world that could affect my supply chain. So there's a lot of information in this screen. So the first thing I can do is, okay, I want to remove a bit of the noise. So in this case, because we're talking about ocean logistics, I want to see how my critical ports are doing, right? So I just narrow it down to the ports that are important for me, which I call my critical ports. They are scattered around the globe, right? I have a global supply chain. And from here, there's a few things I can do, right? I can bring up also, I can see it on the map, as you can see, but also I can bring up the list, right, of, in this case, my critical ports. I can see, different ports here on the list. And on the far right, I can see, as I was saying, the risk score being shown for each, or being calculated for each port, right? So from here, there's already a lot I can see, therefore a lot I can do. So I can also see what is the threat, or what is the risk that is driving that risk score. And here I'm going to pause a little bit, because how an incident or how a threat can, or a risk can score on a location, in this case on risk, will depend on how I define it. This is configurable. I can define that, for example, a port congestion in Savannah, a port congestion of 4 days in Savannah is high risk, but maybe a 4-day congestion in Long Beach is a medium risk, right? Because there's different ports that behave differently with congestion. So having said that, I already have my profile defined. So this is the risk that is being calculated for each port. So from here, I can say, well, you know, I'm specifically interested in what's going on in the Japan area with the tropical cyclone approaching. So I can go ahead and click on the port of Nagoya. That will take me directly to the port of Nagoya right here. I can see it's high risk, it's 17, right? It's forecasted to reduce its risk in the future after a couple of days, but right now it's on high risk, right? Which is what means what's important to me. I can zoom out and see what's the affected area, right? That it's been driving that risk score, right? And from here I can also zoom out, right? And I can also see what the in this case the cyclone, what it looks like, right? From here I can see also what's the history of this specific incident or risk, right? If there any story I wanna look at, I can share it, right? I can click here and share it with any of my colleagues, right? Like check this out. There's this typhoon approaching. And this is already providing some information on right now what's going on with my port in this case. Additionally, I can see that I have lanes, right, that I'm using currently attached to this port specifically, right? So I have one lane coming from Rotterdam into Nagoya, right? That is, again, because it's scoring on risk, right? Because my port is scoring on risk, then the lane automatically scores on risk as well. So why do we do this? Then because we can then drill down all the way to the shipment as well. This way we can also benchmark different lanes depending on where they are scoring risk, in which part of the lane is scoring risk, right? Like we can see here, this lane is scoring risk, high risk at the end of the lane. But more importantly, maybe is that I can also see if I have any shipments running on that specific lane. In this case, I have one shipment, right? That is being represented by the blue dot here. So kind of a recap here. What we're doing, first of all, we have our network mapped, right? I have specified which are the ports that I'm using, and I also detailed what are the critical ports that are for me, right? On top of that, we're layering the risk insights, the risk layer of Everstream, so that I can understand if there is any potential risk that could be affecting my network or the critical pieces of my network that are important for me at this point. And then on top of that, a third layer, I can layer in also shipment information, right? So in this case, we have, let's say, one shipment, which is, approaching Port of Nagoya. I can see two things here. First, I know that this shipment is high risk because the Port of Nagoya is high risk, right? So its port of discharge is high risk, therefore my shipment is high risk. But then additionally, we're able to get additional visibility information on how is this shipment doing in terms of its planned arrival versus its forecast, right? We see this at a delay of 2 days, therefore I'm driving the risk even higher, right? So this is, again, summarizing kind of what kind of insights I can get from like situational information, like the immediate use case that we're talking about here of what's going on in the world right now and how it's potentially affecting my my ocean logistics at this point. All right. So the second example I want to share with you is regarding what Mirko was mentioning a while ago, which is, okay, so I have ports, right, that I work with. Let's say here we're talking about ports that I work with in the East Coast, right? We are also driving the risk score of the same way that we can do for tropical cyclone, we can also define the risk profile for certain ports to drive the risk up based on its congestion, right? So here I have a small selection of ports that I might be using regularly, right, in the east coast of the United States, and I can see here that the Port of Savannah actually is scoring high on risk, right? This means that I can create these reports. These are customizable. I can have as many reports here as I need. They can be reports on shipments, lanes, incidents, assets, or locations such as ports. And I can, from here, I can immediately know what are the other maybe alternative ports that for me are viable alternatives that are scoring lower on risk, right? In this case, for example, we can see that maybe the port of Miami is scoring medium, right? But also I have ports that are scoring lower, like New York or Port of Norfolk, and just by clicking on that, I will be directly headed to that port in the map, right? See if there's any additional threats that could be potentially affecting it. I see it's fairly clear, and this would also help me define, okay, I'm going to plan my next, I'm in the middle of planning on which ports I'm going to use as port of discharge, and maybe I decide in the planning phase that it may make sense to have a longer, road or rail haul instead of using ports that I know that are currently congested, such as Savannah in this case. So basically, for the current turmoil in ocean logistics, congestion and delays, having a better visibility for both short-term disruptions, like I showed earlier, but also the longer-term strategic perspective that we can see here, they're both viable and powerful options to mitigate risk in these uncertain times. Yeah, Dana, back to you, I think.
All right, thank you guys for that wonderful insight today on the record level shipping insights. Record level shipping insights, shipping costs for this year and into next year. Appreciated. So at this time, we're going to start the Q&A with the experts. We've got Mirko and Felipe ready to answer any questions or comments that you guys might have. Please use the chat function and/or the question function. I will moderate that and send those questions over to them. I think we just got a question. I will go to, this one will be for Mirko. Let me just pull it up real quick. Okay, Mirko, what can I do if my container is stuck in one of the 70 ships outside of LA or Long Beach port?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, obviously that there's only so much one can do, but I think what has been underestimated is also the landside congestion. Obviously, if the ship is in that line, it's difficult to be able to make a decision to go to an alternative port. But what you can do to kind of reduce the time that it takes to be, for the containers to be processed on land, is that to kind of shift it from an intermodal shipment, that would kind of rely on rail connections, maybe into the Midwest or elsewhere, and to really use trucking and try to get the container or containers out on a truck. Because what we've seen is, especially in the US, in Los Angeles, but we've also seen it in Seattle, is that the dwell time of the containers, so once they've actually been unloaded, that these are also sky high and have been much higher than in the past. So that could kind of take another week or so 6 to 7 days for the container then to be kind of loaded onto a train and shipped out. So if it's not an intermodal container, but if you kind of recover it or have your broker or so recover it, that could definitely sort of reduce the number of days that before you can kind of receive that container. And that's really something that we kind of advise our customers at the moment, that there is not only the ship congestion.
Mirko, your voice is coming out a little bit staticky, so I'm going to ask Felipe a question just to hopefully give Mirko's connection time to adjust itself. Felipe, let's see. I just had the question. Hold on a second. The question is from Diego. Thank you, Diego. How are the delays and congestion in the U.S. West Coast ports impacting customers and shippers in Latin America? Actually, that question would be more for Mirko. Sorry. Mirko.
Is my audio better now? Sorry.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
The question is, how are the delays and congestion in the U.S. West Coast ports impacting customers and shippers in Latin America?
Yeah, so one of the sort of new solutions actually that we've seen emerge in the market is, especially for Latin America, has been kind of these expedited premium shipments out of China on the Asia to North America trade lane. Basically, what I've mentioned earlier, it would be sort of smaller ships, and there have been new solutions actually from freight forwarders and carriers to kind of combine the smaller, like a faster leg on the ocean side into Los Angeles, Long Beach, and then from there, sort of a gated trucking solution to the airport, especially in Miami, and from there, obviously, Miami being the gateway to Latin America, and then kind of have a second leg that will be the air leg, and there have been really tremendous savings actually, and shipping times just a little bit below 20 days from China into Latin America with this solution, and that solution has been really tremendously successful, especially in the early days of COVID-19. But then obviously now with the congestion at LA, Long Beach, also they have been affected, and that has slowed down tremendously all of the sort of the gains that this kind of multimodal solution has been offering for customers or sort of destinations in Latin America. So definitely has a big impact, especially also if you're looking to, for example, truck then into Mexico from LA, Long Beach. Obviously you're not immune to that. So before you can kind of recover your container, that will obviously kind of prolong and extend the shipping times into destinations in Latin America.
Perfect, thank you. Now this question is truly for Felipe. Felipe, do you have a risk assessment for roads from Mexico, for example? That question is from Rosaria.
Sure, yes. Hi. Yes, we, yeah, definitely. We at this point, we were showing the ocean use case, right? But our solutions support all modes and all regions when it comes down to risk. So we're able to trace, right, the route from point A to point B, and any intermediate stops as well. And we are able to score that route on risk based, again, on the profile, on the risk profile that we define, which means what kind of risks are more important for depending on the type of product, type of business, etc. What kind of risks are more relevant, right? So therefore, which risks will build up the risk score more. And yes, we basically provide a risk score on every segment, every mile actually of the lane.
And just a extension onto that, someone was asking about how much time goes into updating how much time is it between when you update the information? How often, sorry, how often should the information be updated in our system? What can they expect as far as the status of the information, how accurate it is?
So we have, so regarding as soon as we have published a incident, right, or a risk, and Mirko can explain a bit further on how frequently that happens. As soon as we have that published in our solution, then everything that can react, if it's a static location or a lane or a shipment or other, will automatically score on risk after a couple of minutes. As soon as we have it published. Then how soon we publish different types of incidents, I think Mirko can talk a bit further on that.
Yeah, happy to. So if we talk about, for example, congestion data, that is, typically coming in, every few days for the ports. I mean, it's not something that will change dramatically from one day to the next. Obviously, if you take Los Angeles, Long Beach as an example, I mean, whether 67 ships or 70 ships are currently waiting, that has only so much of an impact. Then down the line, if the container ship will then wait, is it 12 days or 12 and a half or 12.25? So typically that information will be updated every few days. But if you compare, I mean, if you have other incidents, and we have a wide range of incidents, and we talk about weather, I mean, there could be a couple of updates every few hours, because obviously a storm can quite rapidly develop from a tropical depression to a tropical storm and then to a hurricane within a matter of hours. So there you might see like every 4 hours like an update on the current location, on your new information on landfall, on the strength and the wind speeds and the affected area, and all of those associated incidents. Then thereafter, once disruption has happened, everything will be close to real time. So there will be only a minutes or hour delay.
Thank you. Got a couple questions. I'll try to paraphrase. But with the holidays coming up from in various countries and regions, that only adds to the problems in many cases. And even this morning, there were some articles out talking about the fear of the shortage in seafaring workers. So do you have any insight on how that will also be, impacting what's going, the trends that are going on right now? Will it further exacerbate the issues? I guess that question would be for Mirko.
Basically, the upcoming holiday season, or
yeah, going into Q4 2021 and then Q1 2022.
Yeah. So yeah, it really depends. I mean, right now, as I mentioned, we don't have a typical year. We won't have probably a typical peak season. A lot of the cargo that is, if you really think about, what's happening in, for example, in Long Beach, I mean, you have the schedules are so disrupted that I think a lot of everyone's already talking about Christmas. So whatever is not on a ship by this point is unlikely to really make it, either on the shelves or really like final customer delivery, what have you. So it's really not going to be a traditional peak season because of the delays and congestion and everything. It's kind of more extended now. So will that have a much of an impact? Probably not. But we don't expect it to come down tremendously either before Chinese New Year, because at the end the ships are still arriving, right? The time it takes to really work off the 70 ships just on the west coast, just on the San Pedro Bay, that will take a while. And you have a couple of ships in Oakland, you have 15 to 20 ships in Seattle, and there's more on the way, even though maybe China might be on hold for a week next week with the Golden Week. the ships are still like departing because there's so much cargo to be shipped, and it will still arrive. So even if there's no ship coming in, it will still take a while to work off those 70 ships just outside of Los Angeles, Long Beach. And the issues that have been sort of plaguing those ports and also, I mean, around the world, we talked about Antwerp, but we could also talk about, you know, Felixstowe in the UK, we could talk about Rotterdam. I mean, those kind of issues with, you know, yard density being too high, then labor shortages because of COVID. I mean, there are countries that have already quite high vaccination rates, but they still have, you know, issues like hiring new labor. There's been a lot of departures, a lot of turmoil in the labor market. So all of that will still continue to have an impact, even though, you know, the volumes at one point may drop. It will not kind of just disappear. There would need to be a period of 1 to 2 weeks where, you know, everything is kind of on hold, and that's likely only going to come in end of January, beginning of February 2022.
Wonderful, thank you. Last question, and there are a ton of questions that are coming in, so what we will see is if we can answer them and provide the answers to you guys the rest of the answers in a later format. I think that would be worthwhile for our audience. So last question, and then we'll wrap it up. It goes to Felipe. Felipe, someone is asking, how can I use Everstream to view the insights all the way down to the shipment and part number levels? Are we able to do that using Everstream?
Thanks, Dana. So yeah, so in the end, we can definitely go down to the shipment level. We are actually doing that for a number of customers. It all starts with mapping and understanding the customer's network, right? And then on top of that, we can layer shipments, right? By consuming shipment information that could come from a TMS system or even directly from forwarders, we can assign risk scores on the shipment level, right? Again, matching the risk profile that we define for those shipments, and we can also layer on top any visibility data that will be needed if you know, if required, on top of the shipment, to even provide even a more fine granularity of what's going on with the shipment. So, and yeah, we can, on top of that, we can add product, SKU, part number. All of that can be part of the shipment object, let's say it like that. So we can actually be providing a risk insight or a risk score on the shipment level that contains those products or those part numbers.
All right, thank you so much. And I would say, you know, for anyone who has any other questions, please feel free to send them in to us. You can respond back to your registration link that you received from us for this webinar, or you can simply go to everstream.ai and simply click on the Contact Us button and put your question in there. All right, and we look forward to getting your questions and comments and answering those. We will be sending out the recording of this webinar tomorrow, and also you will receive, all attendees and registrants will receive a copy of the special report that accompanies this webinar, authored by Mirko Wojcik. So we're really proud of that. We will also be available to provide any demos. If you guys are interested in requesting a demo, please go to our website and click on the Request a Demo button and put your information in there, and one of our sales experts will contact you. All right, and like I said, if you have any more questions, go to everstream.ai. Thank you so much, and we'll look forward to talking with you guys soon. Thank you.